Hello, welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. In the early Sunday morning hours, slightly overcast here in the state of Maine. I'm actually headed to a car show in a few minutes, but before I put my new dial bore gauge away, I've had at least one person, maybe just one person, express interest in showing it off. So I bought a new one. If you watched the last two videos, I was measuring engine bearing clearance. And I became aware, slightly frustrated, that I have two central dial bore gauges. I really like this one, but this is its smallest setting and it's still too big. It's probably 2 3/4 inches, but I like how it's all put together. You just pop it out of the box, put on the anvil of your choice, different lengths, and it's ready to measure. For the other night, doing the rod bearing and main bearing clearances, I tried this sled type, and it's okay, but it's kind of clunky, the actual sled device. It does have extensions, so you could go down in a hole quite a ways, but it does function, has an assortment of anvils. Not my favorite. I bought those both used. I would consider central, middle of the road maybe. Mitutoyo, and there's some really nice ones. You know, it could cost up to thousands of dollars. Not what I was looking to do the other day. Thursday morning, I went shopping online for a inexpensive dial bore gauge. And I could see by looking at the packaging and whatnot, there's really only a couple available in the under $100 price range, which is where I was shopping. In this case, there was the one I bought, and there was another one that had a different extension that would go less than 1 inch. When I was recently, I didn't pull it out here to shoot the video, but I was gifted one that goes 0 to 1 inch. Haven't even had it out of the box yet. Also a central, I believe. So if I have to do lift bores or something like that, I have something that will do that range. So I wasn't interested in one that would go 0 to 6 inch, but this will go 2 to 6 inch. I ordered it Thursday morning and it showed up here in Maine on Saturday. That's all the way across the country in 2 days for $64.95 delivered. That seems like a reasonable deal. But is it any good? Well, I had to assemble it. You have to assemble the head onto the extension. So you remove the couple screws out of this plastic thing. You shove the dial indicator in so it goes around one turn. Can I make it work? Yep. When you shove it in, you want it to go around one turn. That's what the instructions say. The instructions are not much good, so I'm going to hopefully shed more light on it. And then you clamp it in, and then you can screw that back on. If you wish to run the cover, you don't have to run the cover, but I put it back on. On the business end, this is the end that actually does the moving of the dial, the small one. It's on wheels. Has a spring-loaded set of wheels. That's pretty cool. And we have an assortment of anvils and an extension, and then 3 spacers that if you're close to a range you need to be in, you can add a spacer on the anvil. This just unscrews. I actually have a spacer in here at the moment. It's pretty simple. So you can interchange the anvils to get in the measuring range you need to be in. And when you do that, you really want to, it'll only go around about 1.5 turns. You really want to operate in the first turn. And it's also important when you're using this to watch how many times it went around. If you're on the second sweep, this indicator does not have a dial that tells you that. A lot of them have a 1, 2, 3, 4. It tells you how many times the dial's been around. This one does not. But still, for the money, this works really nice. The indicator itself reads in half thousandths graduations. And I like that either side of 0, because when you're using it, you zero it on something, and when you put it in another bore or another opening to compare, because this is nothing but a comparison tool, if it's to the left of the 0, then it's bigger, and it's to the right of 0, it's smaller, and they have up to 25 either way. A lot of them would just have a wheel that goes all the way around. Now this one is split it, so it's telling you either side of 0 on the gauge face itself. So we got the tool out of the box. We've assembled it with the proper anvil for the range we want to measure. In this case, the small block Chevrolet 350 size large journal main bearing on the crankshaft is in the approximate range of 2-inch 450 thousandths, so 2.45-ish. So I chose a 2.4 anvil with a .100 thick spacer. You can just measure here to make sure you're slightly larger than the range you want to measure, but not much. Like I said, you want to operate in basically the first sweep of the dial indicator. This, as I mentioned, is nothing but a comparison tool. So let's say we took this is a 2 to 3 inch mic. So any dimension I talk about is going to start with a 2. And we actually measure the journal itself, and you get good at having the right feel. When it has just the slightest drag, you're not forcing it, you're not doing anything out of the ordinary, and it fits over there several times, you know you're actually measuring the journal correctly. And now, if you took the indicator, clamp this on a vise because you can't hold too many things at once, and to zero the indicator, you actually put it in between and you rock it back and forth. And when you watch the gauge, it's going to hit a high spot and then drop down on either side when you're wiggling. And you want to hold this, straight and level and whatnot, but you want to go back and forth and watch the gauge go up, down, and zero it on the up. It's going to hit the same up every time. And that's where you want 0 to be. So now this is zeroed to the exact size of the journal. When I say you zero the dial bore gauge, the actual red piece, in this case, the gauge face cover, rotates 360 degrees. So you could turn this to make 0 where your high spot is. And now in this case, we've measured the crankshaft journal, locked this. This has a little lock on it. Put this in and we've zeroed the dial bore gauge to the actual size of the crankshaft journal. Now if we were to walk down to the block where I bolted #1 bearing in and torqued it down and put this in carefully, not to scratch the bearing up, which is a concern. And again, you rocked it to the high spot, which is going to be left of my 0, because I know, and it has to be, the opening in the bearing larger than the journal, because that's how it's going to function. So if it is not left of 0, I'm really in trouble. But I'm going to hit the high spot again and just directly read in thousandths or half thousandths my bearing clearance right on the gauge. That's one way to use this. And for the record, when I did it the way I just described, I came up with 4 thousandths. The next method is, let's say we walk down to the block. We took this right out of the package, set it up in the 245-ish range, went right down to my bearing bore, and zeroed this. Hit my high spot, and now I zeroed the dial bore gauge. And then I came up, I still have this clamped so I can operate 2 pieces of equipment, and using the micrometer dial, I turn this back to 0. Again, I've watched how many sweeps I've made, so I'm at the same 0. This may sound crazy, but it works too. And you bring this back to the same 0 I just read down there. So now this is my bearing bore opening dimension. And you write that down. I can set this down. I've written down the dimension. I now know the bearing opening dimension. Now, I measure the journal right here on the bench. I write that number down. In this case, my bore opening was 2.452. My journal was 2.448. And that is a difference of 4 thousandths. So I came up with the same thing. This is a little clunky, but actually if you're just going in dry and measuring cylinder bores, which is what this is really made for, or any bore, but most people think dial bore gauge, they're thinking you're measuring the cylinder for outer round and taper. You're probably going to zero it in the bore and work just the way I told you, backwards. And it sounds clunky holding this and turning this to bring this back to 0, but it's not hard to do at all, actually. So that's another way to use it. In the second scenario I just described, if you didn't want to do any math, this is still zeroed to the bearing opening in the block. This is now a crankshaft journal dimension. Clamp this back in the vise, and when you measure, this is going to tell you the same 4/1000ths. Saves you doing math. So armed with this basic knowledge, there's nothing stopping you from measuring bearing clearance, piston skirt clearance, pretty much anything around in an engine. The choices I made, like this is a Brown & Sharp 2 to 3 mic. This is nice. I shopped and bought used, better quality mics. My first mic I ever got was a Christmas present from my brother. I mentioned he gave me wonderful Christmas gifts that are still bearing fruit decades later. He gave me a 0 to 1 mic, and I had no clue how to even operate it. I actually took a machine tool course at the vocational college that was near my parents' house. And I've mentioned it before, where I learned to run a lathe, kind of, and use measuring devices, because this is good knowledge to have. It's pretty easy. You read left to right like a sentence. So anything I measure with this is going to start with a 2, and then you use this scale and then this scale. You just keep adding up what you're showing. So find out what graduations it reads in, thousandths in this case, and just add left to right. So it's not very hard once you figure it out. So that's decent quality. I've compared it. I actually have a set of imported ones, and when you're doing something like this, where you're really just comparison, if any of these devices will hold a couple thousandths, it's good enough for what a weekend warrior is going to do. Dial bore gauges, like I mentioned, if I bought a Mitutoyo or a Starrett, you're looking at a lot of money. If I was an engine machinist, they would laugh at this. They'd throw it in the trash. But the results surprised me anyway. This is fine quality. I look at Fowler, has a good reputation. They sell the same one with their name on it. In the same price range. They charge a little bit more. But if you stare at the packaging and the actual unit itself, it's the same rig. So I figured I was getting, I bought it from Anytime Tools. The gauge says eye gauging, whatever. $64.95, 2 days out of California. And it solves my problems, at least my immediate problems. Now, these come 3-4 feet long, so you can actually reach down and do all the main bearings in the block. To use something this size, you'd have to start in the back or the front with all the caps off, and you could do one at a time, working forward or backwards. That's my stomach growling because I'm hungry. And yes, I know I was, when I kept showing you to measure the journal, I'm pointing to number 5 when I had number 1 in the block. People pick up on that stuff, so I should have turned the crankshaft around. But it was just figuratively speaking, and in this case, all my journals measure the same anyway. So I did not go expensive or super high quality, but I'm going to pull this thing out of the box a couple times a year, probably, maybe less. Like, for instance, all these engine parts I bought and my tapered ring compressor, I didn't even take it out of the box for 2 years. And that really surprises me, looking back to yesterday's video. Every time the UPS or FedEx comes up, I take it out of the box and look at the stuff. So I don't know how that one passed me by, or I would have returned it back when I remembered where I even bought it. But I hope you have a great Sunday. I'm going to scoot off to a car show. I'll talk to you in a couple days.